Now we are going to discuss about chapter 15. In this we are going to discuss about normalizer transformation, stored procedure transformation, and what is active and passive transformations, what is connected and unconnected transformations. Let's go to the business case 15. The purpose of this lab is to convert single row data into multiple rows and load it into accounts target NOR table. Your source is source accounts table. You need to load data into accounts target underscore NOR. The requirement is you have single row data in this table. What exactly the mapping requires is convert a single row data into multiple rows. Convert single row data into multiple rows. If you observe the data in this table, you have 1997 salary and 12 columns. There are 12 columns of amount. The understanding is in this there are 12 rows to convert like this. 12 columns have 12 rows of data. We need to convert it. That is single row data coming and you want to load it into multiple rows. In projects, sometimes you have a flat file as a source, a financial data. They keep the data in a single row which is pertaining to multiple months' salary. But when you want to load into the table in a database, you want it to convert into 12 rows of 12 months of data. To do that, Informatica provides you with a transformation called a normalizer. The purpose of normalizer is used for converting single row data into multiple rows, or when your source is a VSAM or a COBOL file, you use normalizer like a source qualifier transformation. When your source is a flat file or a table, to extract data from a table or a flat file, you use source qualifier. When your source is a VSAM or a COBOL file, to extract data from those type of sources, it is mandatory that you use normalizer transformation. And also normalizer transformation is used when your source is a relational table in a scenario where you want to convert a single row data into multiple records. That is one record into multiple records. In that scenario, you use normalizer. In this lab, we are going to extract data from a single source which has one record but load data into target multiple records, convert into single row data into multiple records. That is what is the requirement. So your source is a relational table. In that scenario, you can use a normalizer to convert single row data into multiple rows. So let us discuss how to do it in a mapping. Now look at where this table exists. Source underscore accounts table exists in the relational database of source SRC, and this accounts underscore target underscore NOR is in TGT database. We couldn't incorporate in this dimension and fact table loads, so we haven't done it in the staging. We directly extract data from source accounts and load data into accounts target table. The purpose of this mapping is to explain how a normalizer can be used. So, where is the source in SRC database? So I import the source structure from SRC. Where is my target? In TGT database. I import it. Target table is accounts target in OR. Then I'll create the mapping. Mapping create M underscore 15 underscore accounts underscore target underscore NOR. Source underscore accounts target accounts underscore target NOR. Now to convert a single row data into multiple rows, Informatica provides you with a transformation called normalizer. Create normalizer. Syntax for normalizer is NOR, naming convention. You cannot create ports in this. The input ports and output ports will be created when you go to the normalizer tab. Now, what is the output you require? Year, account, and amount. In the source, year, account, amount. How many times amount is occurring? 12 times. 12 times this amount is occurring, representing 12 months. So in the normalizer transformation, there is a field called occurrences. You specify it as 12. So 12 occurrences in the amount. Account is a string, be careful, number, string, and the number. So 12 occurrences. Now you look at the ports. So it creates 12 fields for my amount. So my input is here to 12 columns of amount. So I link it to my normalizer transformation. Now normalizer transformation, year, account, amount, and there is a port called GCID amount. You link it to the month field. So what happens internally? When you use the normalizer transformation, we are converting single row data into multiple rows. Common is year and account, that is 1997, and salary. Now in the source amount 1, let's say 1200, amount 2, let's say 1400. Like this you have till amount 12. So what happens in the normalizer transformation is, when the record comes in, it reads, Informatica reads the row by row data. The first row comes in into the normalizer. Now what happens internally? Whichever is common, that it takes, salary. Now it converts the first column of the occurrence, 12 occurrences, first of amount 1, whatever the data in, it goes into the amount field, and GCID, generated column identification, it will generate a number. For first loop, 1. Like that, for second one, 1997, salary. 1997 salary will be common. From the field of amount to 1400 it will take and put it in the amount. Then GCID will increment by 1. So 12 rows, 12 increments it will do. So you will get the data for 12 months. This is called generated column identification. So you want 12 records represented in the month 12, that is given by the GCID column. Amount comes from the amount field, loads into the amount column, 1997 salary, year-end account. For each and every record, this will be repeated, and this will be incremented by 1 for each column of occurrences. So this is how normalizer transformation works. Single row data comes in, loops through into multiple occurrences. 6 occurrences, 6 times it loops through, or if it is 12 occurrences, and this GCID amount will increment by 1. So this is how you do it. How you do it? I'll show you once again. Mapping, transformation, create, normalizer, accounts target, the normalizer tab, you create year, account string, amount, how many times it occurs? 12 times. So you link this 12 amounts to 12 fields and year account. Then you link the year, account, amount to amount, and GCID amount. It will generate sequence numbers. So in the normalizer, you will create year, account, and amount is 12 occurrences. So open your sheet and write this up. Source accounts, ODBC connection for SRC, the name SRC underscore informatica, read only. And ODBC connection TGT, username TGT underscore your ID, password TGT underscore your ID. So import the source and load the data into accounts target NOR, business case 15, and continue writing the session workflow also. Source connection is SRC, target connection is TGT. Fifteenth business case, source connection name and target connection name, the workflow. Now I am going to create the task, create S underscore M underscore 15 underscore accounts underscore target underscore NOR. Then in the workflow designer, WF S underscore M underscore 15 underscore accounts underscore target underscore NOR. Save your work. So this should, when it executes, and once it should load 12 rows into your target table. It has failed because I didn't give the connections. Let me give the connections. Source is SRC. Target is TGT. Change bulk to normal. Say OK and save your work. And we'll go to the target. Select star from accounts target underscore NOR. So it has loaded 12 records. So this is how it works. Now we are going to discuss about stored procedure transformation. The requirement is extract the data from source vendor's table and load the data into vendor's target SP. Now the requirement is to delete the data into the target. Whenever I load the data fresh into my target table, before I load, I need to delete the data in the target table. This we have done by writing target table properties override. There we say delete from target table name semicolon. That can be done. That's also deleting the data before you load the data into the target. That is deleting the previous data. Same way, but here we want to implement it by writing a stored procedure. This stored procedure will delete when you execute this stored procedure, it will delete the data in this vendors underscore target underscore SP table. This stored procedure is to be created in the database. It is already created. The previous chapters I have asked you to create the stored procedure. Now the requirement is extract the data from source vendors and load the data into vendors target SP. Whenever you load data, every time it should, whenever you insert the data, it should generate a sequence number. Plus, it has to delete the data in the target table in the stored procedure. So, let us define the source. Here the source is coming from SRC database, like your normalizer transformation, which we have done for that mapping. Here is also, it is coming from source, SRC database. Target, it is in PGT database. Vendors target SP. Now the requirement is M underscore 16 underscore so source vendors target vendors underscore target so from supplier ID to the last column, load it for the supplier ID. For this surrogate key, to generate a sequence number, transformation, create sequence generator. So, I create a sequence. I'll start the current value at 1 only and arrange all iconic. So, as per my requirement, a sequence generator transformation is used. Whenever I insert, it should generate with a sequence. Now, but what is my another requirement? Whenever I load the data into my target table, before I load, I need data by executing the stored. To execute a stored procedure from Informatica, that is a stored procedure which is created in the database, you want to execute it. Then Informatica provides you with a transformation called stored procedure transformation. Informatica provides you with a transformation called stored procedure transformation. The purpose of the stored procedure transformation is to execute a stored procedure which is already there in the database. Means you are executing a stored procedure from Informatica. From Informatica, you are going to execute a stored procedure which is created in the database. For that purpose, we will use a stored procedure transformation. So, stored procedure, how to create a stored procedure transformation, that's what we are going to look at now. I'll create a stored procedure transformation. Transformation, create, stored procedure. Syntax for stored procedure is SP. Give the name. Vendors. Where is that stored procedure? That stored procedure is in a database, like a table. Stored procedure is already created in the database. So, to get that stored procedure connected or to assign that stored procedure to the stored procedure transformation, you need to connect to that database, like your lookup. You need to connect to that database. Where is that we have created? The TGT database. This is the database. This is the stored procedure. So in Informatica mappings, you will connect to define the structure of a source to a database. To define the structure of a target, you connect to a database. To define the structure of a lookup, you go and connect to the database. To assign that stored procedure, which is created in the database, to a stored procedure transformation, you will connect to a database and assign that stored procedure. Now, when you want to execute this stored procedure, for that purpose, there are different ways. One is called a target to preload. That means, before you load data into the target, you execute the stored. Target to post load means, after you load the data into the target table you want to execute, then you execute the stored. Or before you extract the data from the source, you want to execute a stored procedure from this stored procedure transformation, then you set it to source preload. Or after you extract the data from the source before the first record is processed by the Informatica at runtime, you want to execute a stored procedure, then you set it as source. Or if you want to execute a stored procedure for every record, then you set it as the normal. Where you set it, I'll show you in a minute. Now, what is our requirement? Before you load the data into the target table, we want to delete the data in the target. Yeah? For that, we created a stored procedure. When it should be executed? Just before the first record loaded into the target table. Then we'll set it as target preload. Just before you load the data into the target, you want to execute the stored procedure. You set it as target preload. So you double click. Properties. This is called the source procedure, stored procedure type. When you want to execute this stored procedure, target preload, target post load, source preload, source post load, or normal. Target preload means just before the first record is loaded, this stored procedure will be what we wanted. So we name it as target preload. Then in the call text, what we do? We give the stored procedure name. The name of the stored procedure, we give it. And you can put it in brackets also, this one, that is called arguments. That is, for a stored procedure, you can give input and output parameters. You can, let's say for any stored procedure, we have written in a stored procedure, select sal plus commission from EMP table, where employee ID. You have to define all this in a variable 1. So variable 1 is the input. Sal and commission will be your output. Let's say you are calling, let's assume that this is your stored procedure. Now from a stored procedure transformation, you are executing this. In the stored procedure transformation, you are executing this stored procedure. So, it has to be passed on an input parameter like employee ID. Input to that is, to pass on to that is 101. Then when it goes and it returns a value. That is, for that particular employee, what is the salary? Let's say 1200. It is called returns value. You pass on the input parameter, it will return. So, in Informatica, if you want to pass on input parameters to that stored procedure, you will write that here. This is called input arguments. But for this stored procedure, we don't need it. We just have a stored procedure to delete the data in the target table. There is no input parameters to this stored procedure, so we don't give any input parameters to it. Just give the stored procedure name and target preload. If you have input parameters and it returns output parameters, then you write here employee ID, that is your input. What you are going to get is total salary, let's assume that is salary plus commission. Then it comes back, that is called a return port, means return value. So you give input parameters to the stored procedure, it will return values. You will capture in what we call it as R port. R port is nothing but a return port. So to stored procedure you input, and to stored procedure you output, that is return parameters. So in this what you write? That employee ID, port and all that stuff. So this is your input and it goes in. I am assuming for this example which I am talking about, input is employee ID, returns the value. But we don't need for this mapping. So I remove all this. Just a stored procedure name, target preload, and I say OK. If there are no input parameters, no arguments, you don't need to give in any bracket the call text. Now when you execute this, what happens? It will be executed. You set it to target preload, means just before. So this will be executed. So before I go further down, you write it down this. Source is your SRC database, target is your TGT database, and to connect to that stored procedure which you have already created, then that is TGT database. So ODBC connection SRC, username SRC Informatica, read only, target connection your ID underscore TGT, username TGT underscore your ID, password TGT underscore your ID. Then vendor's target proc is your stored procedure name. Import that using stored procedure transformation, ODBC connection, username TGT underscore your ID, password. Now let me create the session for this. 16 underscore. Sorry. Okay. Vendors underscore target underscore SP. That is your 16. So you give the source connection as SRC, target connection, TGT, change bulk to normal, plus stored procedure connection. Because it is on a database, you have to give the connection for TGT like you give to lookup. So there are 4 connections: source, target, lookup, and stored procedure. So for only 2 transformations you provide connections. For other transformations which does not need the connections, so you give the connections here. So open your sheet and write down this also. The session name, source connection name is SRC, target connection name is TGT, stored procedure connection name is TGT, workflow name is WFS underscore M underscore 16, vendor's target SP. So this is how it works. Now I am going to execute this. So workflow WF S underscore M underscore 16 underscore vendors underscore target underscore SP, save your work, execute it. Now let us go to the target database. Select star from vendors underscore target underscore SP. So it has loaded the data, 29 records. But has it deleted the data? We will know that. So there are 29, surrogate key last record is 29. Now what we will do is we again execute this workflow. So it should delete the data and reload the data. When it reloads, the surrogate key should start at 30 for the same data. Right click and say start workflow. Now let us execute this. I say order by this key supplier. So it started at 30. So before it loaded, it has deleted the data. That means the stored procedure has been executed. So this is how you work on stored procedure transformations. So target preload, target postload, source preload, source postload, and normal. Normal means you connect it for every record it has to execute it. Now, if you have observed the mapping, this stored procedure is not linked to any of the other transformations. This stored procedure is not linked to any other of the transformations. So there are two types of transformations which are called connected and unconnected transformations. Connected means transformation that connected to the data flow. For each and every record it will pass through that is connected. These transformations too are called connected transformations. For each and every record it will pass through that. Unconnected transformation is separate from the mapping data flow. It is not connected to any of it. It is executed based on some condition or based on the source procedure type. That is, it will execute only once. If you have observed it, stored procedure, target preload. Before the first record loaded, it will execute only once. So if it is not executing for every record in informatica mapping, they make it as unconnected transformation. If it has to be performed for each and every record passing through it, then it is called connected transformation. If it is performing for each and every record, it is called connected transformation. If it performs based on some condition or for some records only, not for each and every record, then it is unconnected transformation. Then there are two types called active transformation and passive transformation. The number of rows which are coming in may not be equal to the number of rows which are going out. Then it is called active transformation. Example, your aggregator transformation. Number of records coming into the aggregator. The other day we discussed about sales AGG table. 9 records coming in, but the output is 4 records. Means number of rows coming in into the transformation may not be equal to that number of rows going out. Then it is called active. Example, your normalizer. Single row data coming in and it is converting into multiple rows, then it is called as a normalizer transformation. So filter, it will filter the records if the record does not satisfy the condition. So number of rows coming in and the number of rows going out will not be the same, equal, so it is called active. Passive transformation, number of rows coming in and the number of rows going out will be the same, equal, that is your expression. Or lookup will return a value or returns a null value, but number of rows coming into the lookup transformation and the number of rows going out will be same, equal number, then it is called as passive transformation. So that is active, passive, connected and unconnected. What is connected stored procedure? Part of the mapping data flow. Unconnected, separate from the mapping data flow. Connected stored procedure returns multiple values, whereas unconnected stored procedure has a restriction. It can return only single value, that is R port, which I have discussed with you in the stored procedure. Here you give the input parameters and the output parameters, like which I said employee ID is input and total salary. You can make it as a R port. You see, I am trying to make 2 return ports. I want to capture 2 return values, but it will allow, if it is unconnected, only 1 return port. If it is connected, then it will allow you multiple return ports. Multiple values can be taken return values. So, when it is unconnected, it can return only 1 value. When it is connected, multiple values executed for every record passing through it, only executed when the stored procedure is called from another transformation or target preload, target post load, source preload, source post load. Stored procedure must include an input argument for each input argument, for each input port in the transformation. No input port is required. Default values are used. Default values are ignored. Same way, lookup transformation connected, part of the mapping data flow, separate from the mapping data flow. Returns multiple values, returns only 1 value if it is unconnected. In lookup transformation also, if you have observed it, or I'll show you. In the ports, you have R port. This is called a return port. This is called a return port. If it is connected, you can return multiple values. If it is unconnected, it will return only 1 value. So, this is the difference between connected stored procedure and unconnected stored procedure, or connected lookup or unconnected lookup. With this, I am done with the chapter 15. These two, the lab for normalizer and stored procedures. Before the first record is loaded, this stored procedure will be executed.